There is a peculiar paradox that emerges when one begins to see through the fabric of consensus reality, and it is this: the more clearly you perceive the nature of existence, the less you can speak of it in ordinary conversation. Not because you've become superior or transcendent, but because you've discovered something that cannot be translated into the language of the marketplace. You see, when you awaken to the deeper currents of life, when you begin to recognize the dance of consciousness beneath the surface of things, you quickly discover that most people are not ready for these conversations. And more importantly, they don't need to be. The truth you've touched is not meant to be distributed like newspapers or proclaimed from rooftops. It operates in a different dimension altogether. This creates a strange kind of loneliness, doesn't it? You walk through the world carrying insights that feel enormously significant, yet you must remain largely silent about them. You attend dinner parties and discuss the weather, politics, the price of things, while inside you're bursting with the recognition that none of this is quite what it appears to be, that the person sitting across from you is not separate from you. That time itself is a magnificent illusion, that what we call death is perhaps the grandest joke ever told. But you say nothing, because you've learned. You've learned that speaking these truths uninvited is not generosity, it's violence. It's an attempt to shake someone awake who is sleeping peacefully. And why would you do that? What gives you the right? The truly awake person understands that awakening cannot be given, only discovered. And so they learn to hold their tongue, not out of fear or shame, but out of profound respect for the journey each consciousness must take in its own time. They become like water, present, available, but never forcing their way into containers that aren't ready to receive them. What follows are 5 truths that the awakened person carries in silence, not because they're secret or sacred in some mystical sense, but because speaking them prematurely creates more confusion than clarity. These are the recognitions that must remain unspoken until the moment when they don't need to be spoken at all. Here's something you've probably noticed. Most human beings are not interested in waking up. And I don't say this with any sense of judgment or superiority. It's simply an observation of fact. The vast majority of people are deeply invested in the dream they're having, and they experience any threat to that dream as a threat to their very survival. Most people are living in a dream and don't want to wake up. Think about it for a moment. What would happen if someone suddenly realized that the game they've been playing, the one they've devoted their entire life to, was entirely optional, that the rules they've been following so religiously were made up, that the goals they've been pursuing with such fervor were essentially arbitrary? This realization would be devastating, wouldn't it? Their entire structure of meaning would collapse. The career they sacrificed everything for, the relationships they maintained out of obligation, the image they've carefully constructed over decades, all of it revealed as a kind of elaborate costume party, and so they resist. They must resist. It's not a moral failing, it's psychological self-preservation. You've learned this the hard way, perhaps. You've tried to share your insights, to point out the bars of the cage to someone who doesn't even know they're imprisoned. And what happened? They became defensive, angry even. They accused you of being negative, cynical, or simply strange. They changed the subject or found reasons to avoid you. And here's the subtle truth you eventually discovered. Their resistance is not your problem to solve. You cannot wake someone who is pretending to be asleep. More importantly, you shouldn't try, because their dream, however confining it may appear to you, is serving a purpose you cannot fully understand. It's giving them structure, meaning, a sense of identity. Who are you to tear that away? The awakened person recognizes that most people need their illusions, not forever perhaps, but for now. They need to believe that success will bring them happiness, that finding the right partner will complete them, that accumulating enough wealth will provide security. These beliefs are not true exactly, but they're necessary scaffolding for a certain stage of development. So you remain silent. You participate in their dream when necessary. You play along with the game, not dishonestly, but with a kind of compassionate awareness that everyone is exactly where they need to be. You stop trying to convince anyone of anything. You simply become a presence, a quiet alternative that people can turn to when and if They're ready to question their own assumptions. This is perhaps the most dangerous truth of all, the one that most people will defend against with every fiber of their being. The recognition that existence has no predetermined purpose, no grand narrative, no ultimate meaning inscribed in the stars. When you first touch this truth, it can feel like falling into an abyss. Everything you were taught, everything you believed about the significance of your life, suddenly seems to evaporate. If there's no cosmic purpose, if there's no divine plan, if you're not here for some great reason, then what's the point of anything? But here's what happens if you don't run away from this realization. If you actually stay with it and let it work through you, you discover that the absence of inherent meaning is not a tragedy. It's the most liberating thing imaginable. Because if life has no predetermined purpose, then you're free to create your own. You're not obligated to fulfill someone else's plan for you. Not God's, not society's, not your parents'. You're genuinely free. This is what most people cannot tolerate: genuine freedom. They want meaning to be given to them from outside, from religion, from culture, from authority figures. They want to be told what their life is for, because the alternative requires them to take complete responsibility for their existence. And that's terrifying. So they construct elaborate belief systems. They join movements and organizations that promise significance. They dedicate themselves to causes, climb hierarchies, accumulate achievements, all in an attempt to prove that their life matters, that it means something. And there's nothing wrong with any of this, except that it's based on a fundamental misunderstanding. The awakened person has seen through this mechanism. They've recognized that meaning is something we create, not something we discover. And paradoxically, once you stop searching for meaning outside yourself, once you accept that there is no script you're supposed to follow, life becomes infinitely more meaningful. Every moment becomes significant precisely because it's not significant. Every choice matters because none of them ultimately matter. But try explaining this to someone at a cocktail party. Try telling your neighbor that their entire life is a beautiful, meaningless improvisation and see how that goes. They'll think you're advocating for nihilism, for giving up, for doing nothing. They can't see that you're actually pointing to the most profound freedom possible. And so you keep silent. You let them pursue their quests for meaning. You nod sympathetically when they talk about their 5-year plans and their life purposes, because you understand something they don't yet, that the meaning they're chasing will never satisfy them. But the chase itself is exactly what they need right now. We come to perhaps the most fundamental recognition of all, and the one that sounds most like mystical nonsense when spoken aloud. The understanding that there is no real boundary between you and the rest of existence, that the sense of being a separate self, isolated inside your skin, is a magnificent hallucination. You are not separate from the universe. You are the universe experiencing itself. When you first glimpse this truth, it's not usually through intellectual understanding. It's more like a sudden recognition, a remembering of something you always knew but forgot. You look at the tree outside your window and realize there's no actual dividing line between you and that tree. You're both part of the same process, the same flow of existence. The atoms in your body were once in stars. The water in your cells has been cycling through the planet for billions of years. Where exactly do you end and the universe begin? This recognition changes everything, doesn't it? Because if you're not separate from the totality of existence, then you can never truly be alone. You can never really die, because you were never really born as something separate in the first place. You're not a stranger in the universe. You're an expression of it, like a wave is an expression of the ocean. But the moment you try to share this insight with someone who hasn't experienced it, it sounds either crazy or pretentious. We're all one. It's become such a cliche, hasn't it? People have heard it so many times that the words have lost all meaning. They nod and smile and think you've been reading too much Eastern philosophy. What they can't understand is that you're not talking about a belief system or a philosophy. You're describing a direct perception. It's like trying to explain color to someone who's only ever seen in black and white. You can use all the right words, but the experience itself is incommunicable. And here's the thing. Trying to convince someone of their unity with existence is completely counterproductive, because the very effort to convince reinforces the illusion of separation. You're saying, I know something that you don't know. You're creating exactly the duality you're trying to transcend. The truly awakened person recognizes this trap, and so they remain silent. They don't go around proclaiming that we're all one consciousness. Instead, they simply act from that recognition. They treat others with kindness, not because it's moral or virtuous, but because harming another is literally harming themselves. They don't need to preach unity, they embody it. And occasionally, very occasionally, someone will notice something different about the way you move through the world. They won't be able to put their finger on it, but they'll sense that you're operating from a different understanding. And if they're ready, they might ask. And then, only then, might you speak. But even then, you speak knowing that words can only point, never capture, the truth you're trying to convey. Here's a truth that will make most people remarkably uncomfortable. Death is not the problem. In fact, death is not a problem at all. It's our resistance to the impermanence of existence, our desperate clutching at permanence in a universe of constant change that creates all our suffering. Think about it. We spend our entire lives running from death. We exercise and diet and take vitamins, all to postpone the inevitable. We build monuments and create legacies, trying to leave some permanent mark on a universe that erases everything eventually. We cling to youth, to health, to life itself, and in doing so, we never actually live. Because life and death are not opposites, they're partners in a dance. Every breath you take in must be released. Every cell in your body is dying and being reborn constantly. The food you eat is composed of things that died so you could live. Death is not the end of life. It's the very mechanism of life. Without death, there could be no life at all. When you truly understand this, when you stop fighting against the impermanence of all things, something extraordinary happens. You become free to actually live. Because you're no longer holding back, trying to preserve yourself, maintaining some false sense of continuity. You can give yourself completely to each moment, knowing it will pass. And that's exactly what makes it precious. But try explaining this to someone who's terrified of aging, who's desperately trying to control every variable in their life to guarantee their safety and longevity. They'll think you're advocating for recklessness, for giving up on life. They can't see that you're actually pointing to the only way to truly embrace life, which is to embrace death as its inseparable companion. Most people spend their entire lives in a state of subtle resistance, resisting what is, hoping for what could be, regretting what was. They're never actually here, never actually alive in this moment, because this moment includes the reality of their own impermanence, and that's too much to bear. The awakened person has made peace with their own dissolution, not in some morbid or depressing way, but in a way that actually allows them to be present. They can love without clinging, create without attachment to outcomes, engage fully with life without needing it to last forever. And this changes how you relate to everything, doesn't it? You stop trying to make moments last. You stop photographing every experience to prove it happened. You stop planning your life as if you're going to live forever. Instead, you show up, you participate, you allow things to be exactly what they are, for exactly as long as they are, and then you let them go. But this wisdom, it cannot be taught. It can only be lived. And so you remain silent. You let people maintain their illusions of permanence. Because those illusions are protective mechanisms, and people will release them only when they're strong enough to face the truth. And now we arrive at the final truth, the one that encompasses all the others. The recognition that awakening itself is not something to be evangelized, distributed, or imposed on others. It is, by its very nature, a solitary discovery that each person must make in their own time and their own way. There's a tremendous temptation when you first wake up to want to wake everyone else up. You feel like you've discovered the most important thing in the world, and surely everyone needs to know. Surely it would be selfish to keep this to yourself. And so you start trying to share your insights, and you quickly discover that nobody wants to hear them. People become uncomfortable. They change the subject. They make excuses to leave. Your friends start avoiding you. Family members accuse you of becoming strange or difficult, and you're confused because all you're trying to do is share something valuable, something that could free them from their suffering. But here's what you're missing. Awakening is not a gift you can give to someone else. It's not information that can be transferred. It's a radical shift in perception that each person must experience directly. And that shift can only happen when someone is ready, when their suffering has become so acute that they're finally willing to question their most fundamental assumptions about reality. Before that moment, any attempt to wake them up is just noise. It's like trying to teach calculus to someone who hasn't learned arithmetic yet. The foundation isn't there, and more than that, it's actually cruel. Because you're trying to destroy their sense of security and meaning before they have anything to replace it with. The truly awakened person understands that silence is not passivity, it's respect. It's honoring each person's journey exactly as it is. It's recognizing that everyone is precisely where they need to be, learning precisely what they need to learn. Your job is not to fix them or save them or enlighten them. Your job is simply to be awake yourself, to embody the truth you've discovered without making a performance of it. And here's the beautiful paradox. The moment you stop trying to wake people up, you become far more effective at it. Because instead of preaching and explaining and convincing, you simply live differently. You move through the world with a different quality of presence. And some people, the ones who are ready, will notice. They won't be able to articulate what they're noticing, but they'll be drawn to it. And those people, they might ask you questions, real questions, not the skeptical challenges of someone defending their worldview. And when that happens, then you might speak. But even then you speak carefully, sparingly, pointing rather than explaining, because you understand that the truth cannot be given, only indicated. So you practice the discipline of silence, not because you're hiding something, but because you're honoring the sacred nature of each person's individual awakening. You trust the process. You trust that everyone will wake up eventually. If not in this lifetime, then in another, if you believe in such things. Or if not, then that's fine too. There's a distinction here that's crucial to understand, and it's one that most people never make. They confuse pain with suffering. They think they're the same thing, but they're not. Pain is what happens when you stub your toe, when you lose someone you love, when life doesn't go according to plan. Suffering is what happens when you resist that pain, when you argue with reality, when you insist that things should be different than they are. Pain is inevitable. It's built into the very structure of existence. You have a body that can be injured. You form attachments to people who will eventually leave or die. You have preferences and desires that won't always be met. This is not a design flaw. It's simply how life works. And there's a certain cleanness to pain when you don't resist it. It arises, it runs its course, it passes. But suffering is what we add on top of pain. It's the story we tell ourselves about how unfair it is, how it shouldn't be happening, how we can't handle it. It's the mental resistance, the emotional flailing, the desperate attempts to make reality different than it is. And this resistance can take a momentary pain and stretch it out into a lifetime of suffering. When you see this clearly, when you truly understand that suffering is optional, everything changes. You stop fighting with what is. You stop asking, why me? Or why now? You simply acknowledge what's happening and work with it. The pain is still there, but the suffering drops away. But try explaining this to someone in the midst of a crisis, someone who's just lost their job or their marriage or their health. Tell them their suffering is optional and see what happens. They'll be offended. They'll think you're being callous or insensitive because they can't distinguish between the actual circumstances they're facing and their reaction to those circumstances. They think their suffering is being caused by the external event, when actually it's being caused by their resistance to that event. The event itself is neutral. It's their interpretation, their story about what it means that creates the suffering. But this is almost impossible to see when you're in the middle of it. The awakened person has learned to meet life as it comes. without the constant overlay of judgment and resistance. When something painful happens, they feel it fully, but they don't add suffering on top of it. They don't make it mean something about themselves or the universe. They simply allow it to be what it is. And this creates a kind of resilience that looks almost superhuman to people who are still caught in the suffering mechanism. They see you going through difficulties with a kind of calm acceptance, and they think you don't care or that you're in denial. They can't understand that you're actually feeling things more deeply than they are, because you're not buffering the experience with layers of resistance and interpretation. So you remain silent about this too. You let people have their suffering, because sometimes suffering is exactly what's needed to wake someone up. Sometimes a person has to exhaust themselves completely with resistance before they're willing to try a different approach, and you can't shortcut that process for them. Now we're getting into territory that really disturbs people. The recognition that the self you've spent your entire life constructing and defending is essentially a story, a fiction, a convenient abstraction. There's no solid, permanent entity called you that exists independently from moment to moment. Think about it. Who are you really? Are you your thoughts? But thoughts come and go constantly. Which one is you? Are you your body? But every cell in your body is replaced over time. Which configuration of cells is the real you? Are you your memories? But memories are notoriously unreliable and constantly being revised. Which version of your past defines who you are? The truth is, the self is a process, not a thing. It's a continuous construction, a narrative we tell ourselves to create a sense of continuity and coherence. And there's nothing wrong with this. It's a useful fiction. It helps us navigate the world, make plans, maintain relationships, but it's still a fiction. When you see through this, when you recognize that the self you've been defending all these years is essentially a ghost, a mirage, a useful lie, it's both terrifying and liberating. Terrifying because your entire sense of identity collapses. Liberating because you realize you were never confined to that narrow definition in the first place. Without a fixed self to defend, you become fluid. You can adapt, change, respond to life freshly in each moment. You're not locked into patterns of behavior because that's just who I am. You're not carrying around a self-image that needs constant maintenance and protection. You're free, genuinely free. But try telling someone that they don't exist, at least not in the way they think they do. They'll take it as an attack, as a denial of their very being. They'll think you're saying their experiences don't matter, their feelings aren't real, their life has no significance. They can't understand that you're actually pointing to something far more vast and mysterious than the small self they've been identified with. Most people are desperately attached to their self-concept. It's all they have. They've built their entire life around this idea of who they are, what they like, what they stand for. To suggest that this is all a construction, that it has no ultimate reality, feels like annihilation. The awakened person has seen through the fiction of the separate self, but they don't go around proclaiming it. They don't tell people they're illusions or that the self doesn't exist. Instead, they simply stop defending their own self-concept so fiercely. They become transparent in a sense, and available to be whoever is needed in each moment without being rigidly attached to any particular identity. And this changes everything. The way you relate to criticism, to praise, to success, to failure. None of it touches that core anymore, because there's no core to touch. There's just this flow of experience, this dance of consciousness, expressing itself in infinite ways. Here's the final paradox, and perhaps the most beautiful one. All the seeking, all the spiritual practices, all the meditation and inquiry and effort to become free. It's based on the assumption that you're currently in bondage. But what if you were never bound in the first place? What if the prison you've been trying to escape is entirely of your own making? What if the chains you're struggling against are imaginary? This is the ultimate recognition that you are already free, have always been free, and the only thing keeping you in captivity is your belief that you're not free. Think about it. What is actually limiting you right now? Yes, there are circumstances, physical constraints, social obligations, biological necessities, but these aren't bondage. They're just the conditions of embodied existence. The real bondage is mental. It's the belief that you should be other than you are, that life should be different than it is, that you need to achieve or acquire or become something before you can be free. When you see this clearly, when you recognize that freedom is not something to be attained in the future, but something that's already present, the whole seeking enterprise collapses. Not because you've achieved some grand realization, but because you've seen through the fundamental confusion that set you seeking in the first place. You were never bound. You only thought you were. And that thought itself was the bondage. The moment you stop believing in your imprisonment, you're free. It's that simple and that radical. But this is perhaps the most dangerous truth of all to share, because it can so easily be misunderstood. People hear, "You're already free," and they think you're saying they don't need to change anything, don't need to work on themselves, can just continue with their destructive patterns because it's all perfect as it is. That's not what this means at all. The recognition of inherent freedom doesn't negate the need for wise action, for growth, for change, but it does change the energy with which you approach these things. You're no longer trying to fix yourself because you're broken. You're simply allowing your natural wisdom to express itself more clearly. The awakened person understands that freedom and constraint are not opposites. They're two sides of the same coin. Within the constraints of existence, infinite freedom is possible. And within that freedom, you naturally align yourself with certain constraints because they serve the expression of life through you. So you don't go around telling people they're already enlightened, that there's nothing to do, nowhere to go, nothing to achieve, because for most people this would just become another excuse, another way to avoid the work of waking up. Instead, you live from that recognition yourself. You embody the freedom that comes from knowing you were never truly bound. And occasionally, someone might notice something about you. They might wonder why you seem so at ease with life, why you don't struggle in the same ways they do. And if they ask, if they're really ready to hear, you might point to this truth. But even then, you know that words can only gesture toward it. The recognition itself must arise from within them. And so we come full circle, back to where we began. The recognition that certain truths must remain unspoken, not because they're secret, but because they're incommunicable through ordinary language and unnecessary to force upon those who aren't seeking them. The 5 truths we've explored: that most people don't want to wake up, that life has no inherent meaning, that you're not separate from the universe, that death is not the enemy, and that awakening cannot be evangelized. These are not dogmas to be believed or rejected. They're descriptions of what you might see when the veils of conditioning fall away. And the paradox is this: the moment you truly understand these truths, you stop needing to talk about them. You stop trying to convince anyone of anything. You simply become a different kind of presence in the world. Quieter perhaps, but also more genuine, less concerned with being understood, more willing to let others have their own experience. This doesn't mean you become passive or indifferent. Quite the opposite. You become more engaged with life, more responsive to what's actually happening, more available to help when help is genuinely wanted. But you stop pushing your insights on people who aren't asking for them. You trust the process. You trust that everyone is finding their way in exactly the right manner for them. And here's what's beautiful about this. When you stop trying to wake people up, when you simply embody whatever truth you've discovered without making a performance of it, you become far more effective, because people can sense authenticity. They can feel when someone is speaking from genuine understanding rather than borrowed concepts. And the ones who are ready, they'll be drawn to that. They might not even know what they're drawn to. They just know there's something different about the way you move through the world. And that difference might plant a seed, not because you tried to plant it, but because truth has its own way of propagating when it's lived rather than preached. So let this be your practice. Hold these truths lightly. Don't cling to them as new beliefs to replace old ones. Let them work on you, through you, without needing to proclaim them. Be silent when silence serves, and speak only when speech might genuinely illuminate rather than confuse. Because in the end, the deepest truths are not spoken, they're lived. And it's in the living of them, not the proclamation of them, that their transformative power is revealed.